At 11:14 a.m. on January 11th, 1944, Major James Howard circled his P-51 Mustang 4 miles above Oschersleben, Germany, a lone speck of silver against the frozen winter sky. Below him, he watched a nightmare unfold. 30 German fighters, a mix of Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds and Focke-Wulf FW 190 seconds, diving like hawks towards 60 unprotected B-17 bombers. The three-year-old Howard was no novice. He had flown 86 combat missions in China with the legendary Flying Tigers. But today marked only his 37th day flying this specific, controversial new fighter. An aircraft military brass had openly called suicidal for long-range escort. This machine, the P-51B, was not an evolution. It was a desperate gamble. A hybrid design mating an American airframe with a British Merlin engine rushed into service to solve a problem that was bleeding the 8th Air Force white. The strategic situation in late 1943 had been nothing short of catastrophic. In the past 4 months, the 8th Air Force had lost 180 bombers in just 3 missions that flew unescorted past the German border. The P-47 Thunderbolts lacked the range. The P-38 Lightnings struggled at the high altitudes. The unescorted bomber losses over targets like Schweinfurt and Regensburg had reached 60 aircraft per mission. Then came Black Thursday, October 14th, 1943. On that single day, 60 B-17 seconds were shot down. 600 airmen were lost, killed, captured, or missing. It was a strategic defeat of such magnitude that the Air Force nearly suspended daylight bombing entirely. The industrial heart of the Reich, which this entire air campaign was designed to destroy, was now effectively untouchable. The P-51B had entered combat only 5 weeks earlier with Howard's 354th Fighter Group, the first unit to test the unproven Merlin-powered aircraft over Germany. They were called the Pioneer Mustang Group. The brass did not trust it. Its range was theoretical. Its engine reliability at extreme cold was unknown. Its combat performance was unproven. Now, Howard's radio crackled with static, but not with voices. His 4-man flight had scattered, chasing a separate, diversionary attack. He was alone. Below him, the German interceptors, launched from 3 airfields around Brunswick, closed on the 401st Bomb Group at 23,000 feet. The lead German fighters opened fire at 800 yards. A B-17 named Little Chum took crippling hits in both wings. Another bomber, Hell's Angels, lost an engine, black smoke pouring from its number 3 nacelle. The formation tightened, a defensive gesture that was ultimately futile. Without fighter escort, these 60 bombers, carrying 600 airmen, would face the full, unmitigated weight of German interceptors for the next 37 minutes. It was Black Thursday, happening all over again. Howard dove. He came in from above at 420 miles per hour, his 6 .50 caliber machine guns converging on the nearest FW 190. The German pilot never saw him. Howard's first burst shredded the fighter's tail, and it tumbled away, smoking. He pulled up hard, loading 7 Gs onto his airframe, lined up a Bf 109, and fired. The 109's canopy exploded in a spray of glass and metal fragments. He kicked the rudder, rolled inverted, and dropped onto another FW 190. 3 down in 40 seconds. 27 still attacking. His wingman's voice should have been on the radio. Silence. His flight leader should have called rally points. Silence. Major James Howard, former Flying Tiger, now commander of the 356th Fighter Squadron, was the only American fighter between 60 bombers and 30 German attackers, 300 miles deep inside the Reich. The German formation, stunned by this single, savage attack, split. 15 fighters broke left, continuing their run toward the bombers. 15 stayed to deal with Howard. Both groups expected the lone Mustang to break off and run. Fighter doctrine was clear. Never engage when outnumbered more than 2-1. Howard had 15-1 odds in front of him, and 15 more maneuvering behind. He had 412 rounds remaining per gun. He was 37 minutes from friendly lines. The temperature at altitude was -42 degrees Fahrenheit. His guns would start freezing soon. He kept attacking. Howard's first pass scattered the German formation, but it was his next move that defied all tactical logic. He climbed back to 24,000 feet, deliberately positioning himself between the bombers and the regrouping German fighters. The Luftwaffe pilots were baffled. Standard American fighter doctrine, a doctrine they had studied and exploited, called for defensive escort. American fighters were shepherds, instructed to stay close to their flock, the bombers, and protect them. This lone Mustang was not acting like a shepherd. It was acting like a wolf. Howard was hunting alone. This wasn't 8th Air Force doctrine. This was the brutal, individualistic calculus of the Flying Tigers, learned over the skies of China, where pilots were always outnumbered and survival depended on pure aggression. At 11:17 a.m., 3BF 109 seconds decided to test this lone wolf. They came at him head-on, a maneuver designed to intimidate and force a disengagement. The closing speed exceeded 700 miles per hour. It was a deadly game of chicken, where a 1-second hesitation meant collision. Both sides opened fire at 600 yards. Howard's tracers walked directly up the lead 109's nose. The 50 caliber rounds, carrying over 11,000 foot-pounds of energy each, hammered the engine block. The Germans' rounds passed wide. At 200 yards, the 109 broke hard left, trailing white plumes of glycol coolant from its ruptured Daimler-Benz engine. The other two scattered, unwilling to follow their leader into the guns of this madman. Howard didn't pause. He reversed his turn hard, pulling 8 Gs. A maneuver so violent it blacked him out momentarily as blood drained from his brain. He came out of the gray tunnel of unconsciousness, instincts taking over, and found himself perfectly positioned on an FW-190's tail. A 3-second burst, 90 rounds expended, and the 190's right wing folded at the root, 4 down. Inside the bomber formation, the fight was not just noise and distant specks. For ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant William Thompson, cramped in his glass sphere beneath the B-17 Hell's Angels, it was a private miracle. Thompson had flown 19 missions. He had seen the P-47 Thunderbolts, tough and powerful, escort them to the German border, and then tragically turn back, their fuel tanks dry. He'd seen the P-38 Lightning struggle, their engines gasping in the thin, frozen air above 20,000 feet. He had never, ever seen this. Thompson counted 6 separate, distinct attacks in just 4 minutes. The P-51 never stopped moving. It dove, climbed, rolled, always positioning itself between the bombers and the attackers. Thompson's pilot, Lieutenant Robert Johnson, keyed his radio, asking for the Mustang's call sign. There was no response. The lone fighter was too busy fighting. Howard was also fighting his gauges. The P-51B carried 280 gallons of internal fuel, but his 275-gallon external drop tanks had been jettisoned on the flight in. Internal fuel consumption at full combat power was a staggering 2.1 gallons per minute. He had perhaps 90 minutes of internal fuel remaining. The bombers, plodding along at 190 miles per hour, were still 32 minutes from friendly lines. This was the moment of decision, the single point where rational training and desperate reality diverged. If he stayed, he would be running on fumes, a glider, by the time they reached safety. If he left now, he could make it back to RAF Boxstead with a safe reserve. The choice was simple: save his aircraft and himself, or save 600 men. The Germans regrouped at his altitude. 26 fighters, 1 Mustang. Howard charged again. His tactics remained unorthodox. A masterclass in aerial disruption. Instead of picking off stragglers, he went for the formation leaders. At 11:22, he came in from the sun, the classic fighter pilot advantage, and hit the lead FW-190 of a 4-ship element. The leader broke. The formation, robbed of its command, scattered like starlings. He didn't chase. He repositioned, waited for them to reform, and hit them again. He was weaponizing the P-51's key performance advantage: speed. The Mustang could reach 440 miles per hour in level flight at this altitude. The FW-190 topped out at 408. The BF-109 at 420. Howard would dive, attack, and then extend away faster than they could follow. He'd climb back up using his excess energy and repeat the process. They couldn't catch him, but these German pilots were experienced. These were not green replacements. Several wore the Knight's Cross. They had survived years over France, Britain, and Russia. They adjusted. They tried sandwich maneuvers. 2 fighters would attack him head-on while 4 more dove from above. Howard saw it developing. He faked the head-on pass, then broke hard right just before gun range. The diving fighters, committed to their attack, overshot, unable to correct. He reversed onto their tails and caught one in the climb. 5 down. His ammunition counter showed 240 rounds per gun remaining, half gone, still 27 minutes to friendly lines. 25 German fighters still circling. And now, his guns were jamming. The P-51B's 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns were mounted 3 per wing, but the design was a compromise. To fit them into the P-51's famously thin laminar flow wing, the guns had to be canted over on their sides. At 11:26 a.m., this design compromise met the brutal physics of 24,000 feet. Howard's right outboard gun stopped firing. It was frozen. The mechanism, cycling hundreds of times per minute, had overheated, then been instantly cold-soaked by the negative 42 degrees air. The metal contracted, the bolt seized, mid-cycle. This was a critical failure. Standard procedure, the training drilled into every pilot, was clear. Break off when guns malfunction. An unbalanced weapon load ruined your aim. And a single gun failure was often the prelude to a total system freeze-up. Howard had 5 working guns and 24 German fighters still threatening the bombers. He stayed. The Luftwaffe pilots were adjusting. They had watched this lone Mustang for 13 minutes, and the initial shock had worn off, replaced by cold, professional analysis. These were experten, several of whom wore the Knight's Cross. They had survived years of combat over Britain and the Eastern Front. They recognized his patterns now. He attacked from above. He targeted leaders. He used his superior speed to extend away. They would no longer play his game. They would force him to play theirs. At 11:28, 8 FW-190 seconds executed a textbook tactical trap. They split into 2 4-ship formations. One stayed high as bait at 25,000 feet. The other dropped low, out of sight, below the bombers at 18,000 feet. They were setting up a bracket or pincer maneuver. When Howard dove on the high formation, the low formation would climb into his escape route, boxing him in. This was a calculated execution designed to end this. Howard saw the bait, and he took it anyway. He came down on the high 4 at a 60-degree angle, his airspeed building past 480 miles per hour. He was pushing the P-51 to its limits, approaching the compressibility red line at Mach 75, where shockwaves would form on the wings and render the controls useless. His 4 working wing guns and 2 nose guns poured fire into the lead FW-190. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds walked from its tail to its cockpit. It rolled inverted, the pilot bailing out. A white parachute blossomed against the gray undercast at 23,000 feet. Howard pulled up hard, 7 Gs crushing him into his seat. Blood draining from his head. His vision tunneled to a pinpoint as the gray edges closed in. He eased the back pressure, and his peripheral vision returned. The 4 fighters that had been hidden below were exactly where he expected them to be. They were climbing toward him at 3,000 feet per minute, their BMW radial engines at full emergency power, ready to catch him in his vulnerable, low-energy state. What Howard did next was not in any flight manual. It was an act of pure, calculated psychological warfare. He rolled inverted and dove directly at them. The German element leader, seeing a Mustang flying upside down and diving at his formation at 500 miles per hour, broke left in pure confusion. Fighter pilots are trained to expect rational, predictable behavior. This was not rational. This was insane. His wingmen, their own discipline shattered by their leader's panic, followed. They scattered. Howard, now upright, lined up on the trailing 190. A 3-second burst. The 190's tail section disintegrated. Control surfaces gone. 6 confirmed kills. At that moment, his left inboard gun stopped firing. 4 guns remaining. Inside the B-17 formation, Lieutenant Robert Johnson watched his fuel gauges. The 401st Bomb Group had been over the target. They had successfully dropped 12,000 pounds of 500-pound bombs on the Focke-Wulf factory at Oschersleben, a critical assembly plant for the very fighters now trying to kill them. Smoke rose 11,000 feet from the burning buildings. The mission was a success, if they could get home. But they were still 22 minutes from the P-47 fighter range at the German border. The lone P-51 was still attacking. Johnson had counted 9 separate engagements. The Mustang pilot hadn't stopped for breath. At 11:33, Howard's ammunition counter hit 100 rounds per gun. That was 400 rounds total, spread across 4 working guns. At his current rate of fire, that gave him perhaps 4 more attacks, maybe 5, if he was frugal. The Germans still had 22 fighters operational. They were forming up again, tighter this time. They'd learned scattering only got them picked off. They would hold formation. Howard checked his fuel gauge. 73 gallons remaining. Enough to get home. Barely, if he left now. The bombers were 19 minutes from safety. The German formation, resolute and angry, was diving toward them. 22 against 1. 4 working guns, 400 rounds, 73 gallons, -42 degrees, cold. His hands were numb. He climbed to meet them, head on. 22 Luftwaffe fighters, a combined force of FW 190 seconds and BF 109 seconds, dove at the bomber formation in 3 distinct waves. This was not a chaotic furball. It was a textbook Luftwaffe doctrine for overwhelming force, designed to saturate and destroy a bomber box by attacking from multiple axes simultaneously. The first wave, 8 fighters, targeted the lead squadron. The second wave, 7 fighters, went for the high squadron. The third wave, 7 more, positioned themselves to catch any damaged stragglers. The doctrine was sound. It was designed to divide the escorts and annihilate the bombers. But it was a doctrine predicated on the assumption of multiple escorts to divide. There was only one. Howard, with his 4 remaining guns and dwindling ammunition, hit the first wave head-on at 11:34 a.m. He ignored the wall of incoming fire, picked the leftmost FW 190, and fired a precise 1-second burst. 30 rounds. His tracers converged, and the 190's engine cowling shattered. Pieces of metal flew back, striking its own cockpit. The fighter rolled away, trailing black smoke. 7 confirmed. He didn't follow. He pulled up vertical, using the P-51's superior energy retention to climb above the second wave. They were already committed to their attack run on the bombers and couldn't follow him up. He hammerheaded at the top of his climb, pivoting his aircraft 180 degrees, and dove back down onto their tails. He lined up the trailing BF 109, 1-second burst. The 109's entire tail assembly sheared off. 8 confirmed. As he fired, his right inboard gun seized. Frozen solid. 3 guns remaining. 310 rounds total. Now the third wave, 7 fighters strong, was climbing toward him. The tactical situation had reversed. Howard was out of airspeed and altitude advantage. He was below them. They had the sun. They had the numbers. They had working guns. Standard fighter tactics, the same tactics taught at every airbase in England, screamed, "Run! Build speed! Extend away! Reset the engagement!" Howard turned into them and climbed. The lead German pilot, expecting the Mustang to dive away in self-preservation, was instead faced with the same nightmarish vision from minutes before. The P-51, climbing straight at him, head-on. Again, both pilots opened fire at 400 yards. Howard's 3 remaining guns rattled 90 rounds downrange in 3 seconds. The Germans' rounds walked up toward the P-51's nose. At 100 yards, both pilots should have broken. Neither did. At 50 yards, the Bf-109's propeller exploded, its hub shattered by the .50 caliber impacts. Pieces of the prop scythed through its own engine, and it snap-rolled to the left. The pilot didn't get out. 9 confirmed. Howard flashed through the disintegrating formation. 6 fighters were now behind him, all firing. Tracers, like angry red hornets, passed above his canopy and below his wings. 1 round punched through his left horizontal stabilizer. Another clipped his right aileron. The P-51 shuddered, the controls suddenly feeling mushy and unresponsive. He shoved the stick forward, diving for the cloud deck at 15,000 feet. The Germans following, tasting blood. Inside the clouds, a graveyard for the unwary. Howard pulled the throttle back, rolled inverted, waited 10 seconds, rolled upright, and pulled up hard, breaking back out into the sun, above and behind the pursuing Germans. They had overshot, diving straight through the cloud. He was on their tails. He picked the last fighter in the string, an FW-190, a 2-second burst, 60 rounds. The 190's canopy blew off, the pilot slumped forward, and the fighter entered a terminal spin. 10 confirmed. His left wing gun seized. 2 guns remaining. 160 rounds. The German formation was scattered again. Howard climbed back to 24,000 feet. His fuel gauge showed 58 gallons. The bombers were 16 minutes from safety. And then he saw them. Black dots in the distance, coming from the west. P-47 Thunderbolts, the relief force. Their distinctive silhouettes, a beautiful sight. But they were still 12 minutes away. The Germans were regrouping. 19 fighters left, and they had stopped trying to reach the bombers. They were focused entirely on him now. All 19. This was no longer a tactical engagement. It was a vendetta. 1 pilot, 2 guns, 160 rounds, 58 gallons of fuel, 12 minutes until help arrived. His oxygen system warning light flickered, then glowed a solid, ominous red. Low pressure. Hypoxia was creeping in. He tightened his mask straps with numb, useless fingers. The Germans formed up, line abreast, all 19 coming straight at him. No fancy tactics, just mass and firepower. A wall of lead 2 miles wide. Howard turned toward them. 19 German fighters, formed in a line abreast formation that stretched across 2 miles of sky, were coming straight at him. This was not a maneuver. It was a firing squad. When they opened fire, they would create a wall of lead and 20mm cannon shells half a mile wide. There was no evasion possible, no escape route. The only way out was through. Howard checked his ammunition counter. 160 rounds, split between his last 2 working guns. That was 80 rounds per gun. At a cyclic rate of 600 rounds per minute, it was 8 seconds of firing time. Per gun, 16 seconds total. If he fired them together, the range closed. 1,000 yards, 900, 800. The Germans opened fire at 700 yards, their discipline breaking early in their anger and eagerness to kill this lone pilot. Their tracers fell away, wide and short. Howard waited. His hands were numb, his vision narrowing from hypoxia. But his combat instincts, honed over China, were razor sharp. 600 yards. 500. At 400 yards, he fired both guns in a controlled 3-second burst. 90 rounds expended, 70 remaining. His tracers converged on the center aircraft, a Bf-109. The fighter's wing root erupted as the 50 caliber rounds found the fuel tank. A brilliant orange fireball blossomed at 23,000 feet. A sudden, violent punctuation in the cold sky. The German line, its center vaporized, instinctively split around the explosion. Howard dove through the gap. 11 confirmed. He pulled up on the other side, gasping for air. The Germans, now 18, reformed behind him. They were no longer just professional. They were angry. This lone American had just killed 11 of their comrades, destroyed 11 expensive fighters, and made an entire Jagdgeschwader look like fools. Howard's fuel gauge now showed 49 gallons. His oxygen warning light was a solid, mocking red. Each breath was a desperate, shallow gasp. Hypoxia was no longer a threat, it was a reality. His fingers tingled, his vision tunneled, and his mind felt slow, wrapped in cotton. He knew he had to hold for 9 more minutes. 9 minutes until the P-47 seconds arrived. 9 minutes that felt like an eternity. The Germans came again, this time in a tighter, more controlled formation. Howard turned into them and fired his last 70 rounds in one long, final burst. 4 seconds of hammering, and then nothing. Just the click, click, click of empty solenoids. He saw strikes flash across an FW-190's cowling, but he couldn't confirm the kill.
Know.
The fighter broke away, smoking, but it was not a fatal blow. He was Winchester, out of ammo, defenseless, and the Germans knew it. They had counted his engagements. They had calculated his ammunition load. They knew he was empty. The hunters, who had been held at bay by his skill, now became a pack of wolves, closing in on a wounded, unarmed target. 18 German fighters tightened their circle around one unarmed P-51. This was the end. But Howard kept attacking. With no guns, no ammunition, he was left with only one weapon, the P-51 itself, and the terror he had already instilled. He dove at the nearest Bf-109. The German pilot saw him coming, saw the Mustang's guns weren't firing, and held his course, expecting Howard to break off in a desperate, last-second plea for his own life. Howard didn't break. He lined up on the 109's tail and closed to 50 feet. The German pilot, looking back, saw the enormous, 4-bladed propeller of the Mustang inches from his rudder, filling his entire canopy. He broke first, diving away in a panic. Howard followed him down to 18,000 feet, staying glued to his tail, proving he was faster, proving he could not be shaken. The 109 pilot, utterly terrified, leveled out and kept diving for the deck, abandoning the fight. Howard climbed back up, his engine laboring. 37 gallons of fuel. 17 German fighters left. They formed up again, wary now, confused. He turned into them again. His hands shook on the stick, not from fear, but from the combined effects of extreme cold and oxygen starvation. His heater had failed 20 minutes ago. The cockpit temperature was -44 degrees Fahrenheit. One unarmed P-51, 17 German fighters. 8 minutes. At 11:41 a.m., he dove at another Bf-109. It was a pure intimidation run. The German held his course for 3 seconds, then broke. Howard followed him through the break, engaging him in a rolling scissors. This wasn't just a bluff. This was a statement. He was demonstrating that even without guns, he was the better pilot.
Here we see the superior
For 40 seconds,
of the P-51,
the two aircraft
proving
wheeled through the
decisive
sky
against the Messerschmitt.
in a pure test of maneuver and skill. The 109 pilot, completely outclassed, disengaged and dove away, giving up. One more enemy fighter neutralized without firing a single shot. Inside the B-17 Hells Angels, co-pilot Lieutenant James Wilson watched through his side window, a witness to the impossible. The lone Mustang was still fighting. 27 minutes into the engagement. But Wilson noticed something critical. The P-51 wasn't firing anymore. It was just chasing, maneuvering, bluffing. And the Germans kept breaking off. They were completely unnerved. They thought it was a trap. They couldn't rationalize that one pilot would do this. They concluded other Mustangs must be hiding in the sun, waiting to pounce. There were no other Mustangs. Just one pilot, one aircraft, and 0 ammunition. The German formation leader, his patience shattered, made a final, desperate tactical decision. He would split his force. 8 fighters would stay high to engage and finally destroy this insane American. The other 9 would dive for the bombers. If the American wanted to fight, fine, let him fight. But the bombers would die. Howard, his mind clouded by hypoxia but his instincts sharp, saw the split. This was the checkmate. He had to choose, save himself from the 8, or save the bombers from the 9. He couldn't do both. He turned his P-51 toward the 9 fighters diving on the bombers. He caught them at 19,000 feet, coming in from their 7 o'clock high, lining up on the leader, his empty guns pointing the threat. The German leader saw him coming and broke hard right, his wingman following. The attack formation, robbed of its cohesion, scattered. Howard picked another target, closing to within 30 feet of an FW-190's tail. The German pilot looked back, saw the Mustang filling his mirrors. No muzzle flashes, but he broke anyway, dove away. Howard chased 2 more fighters, getting on their tails, forcing them to disengage. But now, the 8 fighters that had stayed high were diving on him. Howard pulled up to meet them, his airspeed bleeding off. 190 knots, 170, 150. He was hanging on his propeller, a stall imminent. The Germans opened fire at 200 yards. Rounds passed below him. He kicked his rudder, skidding the P-51 sideways. More rounds. He shoved the nose down, dove away, building speed. His fuel gauge needle was on the peg. 28 gallons. The red warning light flashed. 5 minutes of fuel. The bombers were 7 minutes from safety. The P-47 seconds were 4 minutes out. He could see them clearly now. 36 Thunderbolts. Their black and white invasion stripes a beautiful, welcome sight. At 11:44 a.m., the German formation leader called off the attack. The P-47 seconds were too close. The advantage was gone. Time to go home. 18 German fighters turned east, heading back to Brunswick, having lost 11 aircraft and 11 pilots to 1 Mustang. Howard watched them go, His engine coughed, fuel pressure dropping. He adjusted the mixture, leaning it out, praying. The engine smoothed. He turned west and followed the bombers. At 11:47, 33 minutes after it began, the engagement ended. 60 B-17 seconds, carrying 600 men, headed home. Every single bomber that Major James Howard had defended survived. Not one was shot down. Howard landed at RAF Boxstead at 12:51 p.m. His P-51B rolled to a stop, its engine sighing as it quit. Ground crew ran to the aircraft. They opened the canopy. Howard sat motionless for 10 seconds,
I'm on the wing. I'll check
the adrenaline fading,
Careful up there.
replaced by a bone-crushing fatigue. He climbed out, his legs nearly buckling. 3 hours and 37 minutes in the cockpit, 90 minutes of it in continuous combat.
Easy, Major.
His crew
Gotcha,
chief,
sir.
Technical Sergeant Henry Rudowski, counted the damage. 37 bullet
41,
holes.
42,
3
43,
were 20
44,
millimeters
45,
cannon
46,
strikes.
47,
1
48,
had
49,
punched through the
50,
wing
51,
root,
50.
missing the main fuel tank by 6 inches. When asked how many he got, Howard, still dazed, said, "Maybe 3, maybe 4. Hard to tell."
Did we
The
complete the
401st Bomb Group, however, told a different story. 18 different bomber
Lone
crews all reported the
P-51
same thing.
Engaged entire
1
formation.
P-51, fighting alone for over half an hour. The 8th Air Force investigation confirmed it. Howard's gun camera footage, when processed, was undeniable. It showed 11 confirmed kills. On March 6th, 1,944. Major James Howard became the only fighter pilot in the European Theater of Operations to receive the Medal of Honor during the war. Not just because he shot down 11 aircraft, but because he defended 60 bombers alone for 37 minutes, and because he kept fighting when his ammunition ran out. This mission fundamentally changed fighter doctrine. Before January 11th, fighters were defensive, shepherds. After Howard's mission, they were authorized to be aggressive hunters, seeking and destroying the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found. The pioneer Mustang group had proved the P-51 could win at any odds. Within 3 months, nearly every fighter group in the 8th Air Force was converting to Mustangs.
The conversion to the
Bomber
Mustang
losses
is total.
plummeted from a catastrophic 9% in October 1943 to less than 2% by spring 1944. James Howard didn't just save 600 lives that day. He proved that the P-51 Mustang could win the air war. And in doing so, he saved the entire American daylight bombing campaign from the brink of failure.